My name is Serena was, and they made a fatal mistake the night they forgot I was still in the house. I know how that sounds. Dramatic. Like something you'd see printed on a true crime podcast thumbnail. But I've been sitting with this story for 2 years now, turning it over in my hands like a stone I can't put down, and I've decided I'm done being quiet about it. So I'm going to tell you exactly what happened. From the beginning, from the part where I was still naive enough to think marrying into the Whitfield family was going to be the best thing that ever happened to me. I grew up in Dayton, Ohio. My dad worked 31 years at a GM plant before his knees gave out. My mom cleaned houses 3 days a week and made the best pot roast in Montgomery County. We weren't poor, but we knew what it felt like when the electric bill came in higher than expected. We knew what it felt like to check the price of something twice before putting it in the cart. I graduated from Ohio State with a degree in accounting, passed my CPA exam on the first try, and landed a position at a mid-sized firm in Columbus. I was 26 years old, living in a studio apartment with one good lamp and a cat named Biscuit, and I thought I was doing just fine. That's when I met Bennett. Bennett Whitfield. He was visiting a colleague at my firm for some kind of due diligence review. I was in the elevator. He held the door. We started talking in the lobby while we both waited for the rain to stop, and he asked for my number before he walked to his car. He was charming in a quiet way, not flashy. He wore a watch I later learned cost more than my first car, but he never mentioned it. He asked questions and actually listened to the answers. He remembered things that I liked black coffee, that I had a sister in Phoenix, that I hated cilantro. On our third date, he showed up with a sandwich from the place I'd mentioned once in passing 6 weeks earlier. I thought, this man pays attention. That's rare. What I didn't fully understand then was that Bennett came from a world where attention was a form of control and generosity was always transactional. His family was old Cincinnati money, not Silicon Valley new money, not lottery money, the kind of money that has a name attached to a wing of a hospital, the kind that gets mentioned in the city's social pages at charity galas. His father, Mr. Huppaters Whitfield, had retired from running a commercial real estate empire he'd inherited from his own father. His mother, and this is where I have to be careful because every word I choose matters, his mother was a woman named Sylvia. I'll come back to Sylvia. Bennett proposed after 2 years of dating. A simple ring, nothing ostentatious. He told me he loved that I had my own career, my own opinions, my own life. He said his family would love me too. I believed him. God, I believed him. The first Sunday dinner at the Whitfield estate outside Cincinnati should have told me everything I needed to know. The house was a federal-style brick colonial with a circular driveway and a pond in the back that his mother called the water feature. I showed up in a dress I'd bought specifically for the occasion. Heels I'd practiced walking in for 2 days. And a bottle of Bordeaux that cost me $45, which for me at the time was not casual. Sylvia answered the door herself. She looked at the wine, then at me and said, "How thoughtful," in a tone that meant the opposite. At the table, Bennett's sister, I'll call her his sister because that's what she was, whatever name she goes by in her social circles, sat across from me and asked in front of everyone whether I found it difficult to dress professionally on an accountant's salary. She said it with a smile, the kind of smile that knows exactly what it's doing. Bennett said nothing. His father said nothing. I said I manage, and changed the subject and told myself it was first meeting nerves. People say awkward things. I gave them the benefit of the doubt. That was my first mistake. We married 14 months later. A small ceremony. Bennett wanted it that way, and I was fine with that. My dad walked me down the aisle with his eyes full of tears and told me I looked like my mother on her wedding day, and that was the best moment of the whole week. We moved into a house in Hyde Park, a neighborhood in Cincinnati that sits close enough to the Whitfield orbit that Sylvia felt comfortable dropping by without calling. She did this twice in our first month. Once while I was working from home on a deadline, once on a Saturday morning when I was still in pajamas. Both times she walked through my house like she was inspecting it. Both times she found something to comment on. The way I'd arranged the kitchen, the paint color in the hallway, a throw pillow she found a bit busy. I started thinking of her visits as inspections. because that's what they were. 6 months into our marriage, Bennett was offered a project in Dubai. His firm, a subsidiary of his father's real estate company, needed someone to manage a joint venture for 18 months. It was a huge opportunity. I told him to take it. I had my own work. Our house was set up. We'd video call. We'd fly out to see each other when we could. We were adults. We could do this. What I hadn't calculated was what 18 months alone would look like with Sylvia 20 minutes away and no Bennett between us. The shift happened gradually, like weather. First, it was the dinners. Sylvia began hosting Family Sunday every week and made it clear, through Bennett, that my attendance was expected. Not requested. Expected. I went. I sat at that table and ate her housekeeper's cooking and answered questions about my work in the polite, deflecting way I'd learned, and tried not to let it show how much it cost me to be there. Then came the comments about children. Subtle at first. A mention of a friend's grandchild. A story about a cousin's baby. Then less subtle. Then direct. Bennett is 34, Serena. The window doesn't stay open forever. I told her we had a plan and that our timeline was between Bennett and me. She didn't like that. Then she started in on my family. Nothing overt. Just questions asked in the wrong tone. Your father is still in Dayton? Does he enjoy retirement? As if Dayton were a foreign country. As if retirement meant something lesser when it came after factory work instead of golf club memberships. I came home from one of those Sundays and cried in the shower for 20 minutes, and I still don't entirely know why. Except that grief is sometimes just the gap between who you hoped someone would be and who they actually are. Bennett's sister was worse in a different way. Where Sylvia was ice, his sister was fire, quick, hot, and designed to leave a mark. She made jokes at my expense in group settings. She borrowed my name for a punchline about coupons at a birthday party and laughed loudest when other people didn't quite follow the joke. She commented on social media posts in ways that were technically compliments but felt like the opposite. Bennett told me I was being sensitive. He said she was just like that with everyone. He said I needed to learn how to take a joke. I started keeping a list. Not out of paranoia, out of self-preservation. When you're made to feel like you're imagining things, you start writing them down just to confirm for yourselves that they happened. The list got long. The night everything changed was a Tuesday in March. Bennett was still in Dubai. He'd been gone 11 months. We'd developed a rhythm, video calls on Sunday and Wednesday nights, text throughout the day, the occasional care package I'd send with things he couldn't get easily overseas. I missed him. I still loved him. I was still trying. Sylvia had called that afternoon to say she needed to discuss the family's tax situation with me because her regular accountant was unavailable and there was a filing deadline. This was technically within my professional capacity. But it was also transparently a pretext. She had a full-service accounting firm on retainer. What she actually wanted was an excuse to come to my house and be in a position of needing something from me, which inverted the power dynamic in a way she found more comfortable. I said yes. Because I always said yes. Because I was still trying to build something with these people even then. She arrived at 6 in the evening with Bennett's sister beside her, which I hadn't expected. I offered them coffee, which they declined. I had spread some documents across the kitchen table. Sylvia sat down and immediately began moving my papers aside to make room for her own folder without asking. It was a small thing. It shouldn't have hit me the way it did. But something shifted in me in that moment. A quiet, precise kind of anger I'd been managing for a year and a half. And I said calmly, "Those are work documents. I'd appreciate you not moving them." The temperature in the room changed. Sylvia looked at me the way you look at something unexpected that has appeared where it shouldn't be. Then she said in a voice she kept very measured, "I've been patient with you, Serena. Patient with your little career, your little house, your little opinions about how things should be done. But I want you to understand something very clearly. You are in this family because Bennett chose you, not because we did." I said nothing. My hands were flat on the table. "And if you think," she continued, "that your name on a marriage certificate gives you the right to speak to me that way in a house my son pays for." "We both pay for this house," I said. "My name is on the mortgage." That was when his sister stood up. She said something. I won't repeat it here, but it was the kind of thing you only say to someone you've already decided isn't fully a person. She said it loud enough that the neighbors could have heard it through the window. And then she did something I never could have anticipated in 20 years of imagining worst-case scenarios with these women. She picked up my coffee mug from my cabinet in my kitchen, and she poured what was left of its contents onto the work documents spread across the table. My documents, months of client data, ruined. And she smiled. I stood up slowly. I looked at both of them. Sylvia had a look on her face I can only describe as satisfaction. The kind that comes from finally having pushed something far enough to get the reaction you wanted. His sister was still smiling, and for the first time in 2 years of being in this family, I felt something in me go absolutely, completely still. Not sad, not panicked, still. I said, I'd like you to leave. We're not finished, Sylvia said. Yes, I said, you are. That was when the front door opened. I had not called Bennett. I want to be completely clear about that. What happened next was not something I arranged or anticipated. My sister, who had been visiting from Phoenix for a long weekend, staying in the guest room, and had been out picking up dinner, walked through the front door with 2 bags of takeout and stopped cold in the entryway, taking in the scene in front of her. But she wasn't alone. She had run into our neighbor on the driveway, a retired attorney named Mr. Caldwell who'd lived next door for 30 years and had become something of a quiet friend to me over the past 18 months. The kind who waves from the porch and occasionally drops off vegetables from his garden. He had walked her to the door because he'd heard raised voices and wanted to make sure everything was all right. And standing just behind him was Bennett. I had known he was coming. He'd been planning to surprise me. His project had wrapped 2 weeks early, and he'd booked a flight without telling me, and he landed at CVG that afternoon, and he'd taken a car from the airport, and he'd walked up to his own front door to the sound of his mother's voice and his wife's silence. He stood in the doorway in his travel clothes, carry-on still rolling behind him, and he looked at the room. He looked at the soap documents. He looked at his sister. He looked at his mother. He looked at me. I did not say a word. I didn't have to. Mr. Caldwell, it turned out, was the kind of man who states what he has observed without embellishment or apology. He said quietly and precisely that he had been able to hear the conversation from outside, quite clearly, through the window I'd left cracked for the spring air, and that he wanted Bennett to know what he'd heard. What followed was not a scene from a movie with screaming and dramatic exits. What followed was something quieter and, I think, more permanent. Bennett asked his mother, in a voice I had never heard him use before, to explain what had happened to my papers. His sister began talking, quickly, and the story she told was not the story that had actually occurred. She had barely gotten 3 sentences in when Mr. Caldwell, very calmly, corrected her. Sylvia did not raise her voice. She tried the approach she always tried, measured, plausible, the language of reasonable women who have never done anything wrong. She said she didn't know what I'd told that man, but that things had simply gotten heated. Bennett looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "Mom, I need you to go." She blinked. "Bennett." "I'll call you," he said. "Not tonight, but I'll call you." They left. His sister didn't look at me on the way out. Sylvia paused at the door and looked back at her son, and I could see that she understood something had changed. Not just for the evening, but in a larger, more structural way. The look on her face was not anger, it was recalibration. My sister put the takeout bags on the counter and came and stood beside me and didn't say anything, which was exactly right. That night, after Mr. Caldwell had gone home and my sister had tactfully disappeared to the guest room, Bennett and I sat at the kitchen table, the same table where all of it had happened, with the dried coffee stains still on the wood, and he asked me to tell him everything, not just tonight. Everything. So I did. I talked for almost 2 hours. I used the list I'd been keeping. I read him specific dates and specific quotes and specific incidents that I had been telling myself were not as bad as they seemed, and I watched his face as he heard them laid out in sequence. When I was finished, he was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Why didn't you tell me?" And I said, "Because you told me I was being sensitive." That landed. I could see it land. He apologized that night. It was not a perfect apology. It didn't account for all the ways his silence had been its own kind of participation. But it was honest, and it was a beginning. We spent the next several weeks in couples counseling, which had been my condition and which he agreed to without argument. He also had a conversation with his mother that I was not present for, but whose effects I could measure. The Sunday dinners became monthly, then optional. His sister and I have not spoken since that night, which is, I have decided, a perfectly acceptable outcome. What I want to say to you, and this is the part that took me the longest to understand, is that none of it was really about me. Sylvia's campaign against me was never about who I was. It was about what I represented. Evidence that her son had made a choice she hadn't sanctioned, had built a life outside the orbit she controlled. People like that don't dislike you for your flaws. They dislike you for being independent, because independence is proof that they are not necessary. I spent 2 years trying to earn a place in that family, adjusting, accommodating, softening, showing up to dinners I didn't want to attend, biting back things I had every right to say. And none of it worked, because it was never going to work. The price of admission they were charging was not politeness or effort or even love for their son. The price was erasure. The price was me becoming small enough that I stopped mattering. I'm not small. My dad worked 31 years so his daughters could stand up straight. My mom cleaned other people's houses so we could have our own. I passed a CPA exam that most people fail twice. I have a mortgage with my name on it, and a husband who had to learn, the hard way, that staying silent is still a choice. I am not a guest in my own life. Biscuit is still here, by the way, 11 years old now, moves a little slower, still claims the warm spot on the couch like he's paid rent his entire life. Some mornings I watch him stretch out in the patch of sunlight by the window, and I think about that note my dad tucked into my suitcase when I left for college. Just a folded piece of paper, 4 words in his handwriting, "Don't let him shrink you." I've got it framed on my desk now. I should have listened sooner, but I'm listening now. The coffee stain stayed on the kitchen table for 3 days after that night. I kept meaning to scrub it out, but every time I walked past it, I found myself just standing there, looking at it, thinking about how strange it is that the moments that change your life rarely announce themselves in advance. I used to think that if I was patient enough, polite enough, present enough, people would eventually see me clearly. That goodness was a kind of argument you could win if you just kept making it long enough. Sylvia and my sister-in-law taught me that this is not always true. Some people are not confused about who you are. They see you exactly as you are. Capable, independent, rooted, and that is precisely the problem. You can't earn your way into the good graces of someone who has decided that your existence is an inconvenience. What I've come to understand is that there's a difference between being kind and being compliant. I was confusing the two for almost 2 years. Kindness is a choice that comes from strength. You give it freely because it reflects who you are and you don't require anything back. Compliance is something else. It's what happens when you swallowed your own instincts so many times that you start to mistake silence for grace. I kept that list because some part of me, some quiet, clear-eyed part that I kept trying to talk myself out of trusting, knew that what was happening was real and that I would eventually need proof, if only for myself. That took a kind of intelligence I don't think I fully valued at the time. Not book intelligence, not the kind that gets you through a CPA exam, the kind that pays attention, the kind that notices patterns and names them honestly, even when the people around you are asking you not to. And then there's the question of what you do when the moment finally arrives. When the door opened and Bennett was standing there, I didn't perform. I didn't break down, I didn't explode, I didn't rush to frame the narrative first. I just stood in what was true and let it be visible. That's steadiness, holding yourself together under pressure, not because you're numb, but because you know who you are. That's something my dad modeled for me every single day he went to work without complaint, without bitterness, without letting the weight of it make him small. Bennett had to reckon with the fact that his silence had been a choice. That's hard to sit with for both of us. But I think real repair only happens when you stop protecting people from the accurate version of events. The counseling helped. The honesty helped more. Biscuit is in the sun. The stain is gone from the table. My dad's note is still on my desk. I think the thing I most want anyone to take from this, if you're somewhere in the middle of your own version of it, keeping your own list, trying to talk yourself out of trusting what you know, is that the truth has a way of creating its own moment. You don't have to force it. You just have to still be standing when it arrives, and you have to have done the work quietly, without an audience, to make sure that when it does arrive, you're the one who's ready. That's the part no one sees, the part before the door opens.